Today we are welcoming Allison Arlotta, who is with Build Reuse on the board and is actively involved in the deconstruction and material reuse movement. She will also be speaking this fall as part of a mapping project in collaboration with Yarden Harari and Amanda Kaminsky. So welcome, and we're just going to take a few minutes for a few quick introductions. Catherine Quigg, if you don't mind, we can pass it around. Just say a few words about yourself, and then we'll launch into Allison's presentation.
Sure. My name is Catherine Quigg. I'm actually a structural engineer, but I'm with the American Institute of Steel Construction.
Marianne, can you say a few words of introduction about yourself?
Oh, hi, I'm Marianne Duffy, and I just got on the wrong, I just got on the other Zoom link. Is there like the Google Meet link? Anyway, that's unimportant. So I'm an architect and have been working with Daphne and everyone else here for a little while in this zero waste committee. I'm do work in South Philly, and I've also recently joined a reusable systems, design systems, sustainability firm. Really excited to hear.
Wonderful. Lauren, can you say a few words?
Sure. My name's Lauren Powers. I am an architect at WRT, and I joined the Coke Group maybe a year or 2 years ago, and I've been participating on the Zero Waste Committee for about a year.
Let's see, Christina.
Hello, I'm Christina. I graduated from Virginia Tech in 2020, and I joined the Zero Waste subcommittee because of my interest in the relation between food and architecture. And yeah, I've had a blast so far with them.
We're lucky to have you. And Catherine Urbaniak, just a word or two about yourself.
I work in healthcare architecture at Nelson, and I joined the Zero Waste group right before the pandemic, basically.
Wonderful. All right, well, that's just a little quick overview. We have a couple of other members who were unable to join us today, but since we are recording the presentation, we'll be sharing that with them. And with that, we can turn it over to Allison. Do you want me to share the screen so you can do your presentation, or would you just like to speak?
I can share my screen.
Okay, here we go.
I think I'm allowed. Let's see.
Yeah. Let me see. Sharing. And see, sorry. Am I getting you on there?
I think that you need to enable my sharing.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. Or you can make me the host.
Right, right. Let me just see how I did this. Bear with me, guys, because
we believe in you, Daphne.
Oh, you guys are funny.
If you're in your Zoom, you're like right now you're sharing your screen, I think. So
yeah. Okay, I'm going to, I've got participants. You are sharing your screen. Should I stop sharing?
Yeah.
Okay. I just stopped sharing.
And then under participants, you should be able to make me the host.
Right. Thank God Allison is here. All right, more. Trying to get you to pull down that tab. Bear with me.
Well,
your time.
It's no longer a girl power meeting. It looks like Jonathan has joined us.
Make host. Spotlight. Make host. You are the host. There you go.
Huzzah.
Allison, are you the host?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Okay. I think that means I also have to admit people, but we'll see if I can do that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today about material reuse. And I'm really excited to talk a bit about build reuse and how architects can be advocates for reuse. So first, let me introduce myself a little bit. So I currently work in the Strategy and Communications Department for Architecture Research Office, which is a New York City architecture firm. But my background is actually in historic preservation. And when I was writing my master's thesis at Columbia, I got really interested in material reuse and kind of like how buildings come down, which is a little controversial. But I got super involved with this organization, Build Reuse, which at the time was known as the Building Materials Reuse Association. So I should be clear that I'm not an architect myself. So I work with a lot of architects, but you guys have a lot of knowledge that I don't have. After writing my thesis, I continued to sort of be involved with Build Reuse and eventually started serving on the board, which is what I do now. So Build Reuse, we're a national nonprofit organization that connects the various sectors of the reuse world and advocates for material reuse across the country. And our mission is to empower communities to turn waste into local resources. We're a membership organization with members across the US and Canada, and membership is open to all individuals with an interest in reusing building materials. And we support the reuse industry in a number of ways. So we publish the Introduction to Deconstruction textbook, which is a pretty widely used textbook among deconstruction trainers. And we're actually just this year piloting a project, a national registry of deconstruction trainers, because that's one of the questions we get the most often is how can I learn how to do deconstruction? And we're going to talk more about that in a bit. So we also maintain a working knowledge of the developments in the US reuse industry, which these days are moving fast and constantly changing. And we field a wide range of questions about material reuse. We speak with researchers and we connect interested people. So our biggest program is our annual conference, which is coming up the week after next. Decon and Reuse brings together architects, reuse professionals, people in policy, deconstruction contractors, and really everyone in between to find ways to build a world without waste. And it's going to be entirely virtual for the first time this year and held over 3 days. So we're trying to make it super accessible and easy for people to join. And we'd really love to see you there. So today I'm going to share a little bit about the current context and political changes that are driving an interest in material reuse in architecture before diving into what I see as some of the challenges and potential roles of architects as advocates for reuse. So I know you are all very well informed about reuse at this point, so hopefully this isn't too repetitive. So what do I mean by material reuse? So building material reuse used to be incredibly ordinary, and this was true all over the world, but today I'll focus mostly on North America. And when buildings were demolished in the past, their component parts were dismantled by hand for resale and reuse. So today we call this process deconstruction, and it's sort of like construction in reverse. But back then it was just the norm. And you can see here in a photograph from 1913, the demolition of the JP Morgan Bank in New York. So wood is being stripped from each floor and sent down these chutes to horse-drawn carriages that would cart material off to lumber yards and use material yards in and around the city. And this material was then sold and reused in new construction. So for example, this is Our Lady of Lourdes Church on West 142nd Street in New York. If you're ever uptown, I recommend taking a look. It was built in 1904 with material from several prominent buildings in the city, and most sort of visibly the facade elements of the National Academy of Design, which was designed by P.D. White in 1865. And so this was not done for like altruistic or environmental reasons. It's because it made the most financial sense at the time. And so materials were expensive to extract, labor was totally unregulated and very cheap, And demolition crews would usually actually pay building owners for the privilege of taking down their buildings because they made a profit selling the material. So that's obviously not true today. Technological, economic, cultural, political reasons in the mid-century, mid-20th century changed how we build and demolish in ways that persist today. So it's a very long and complicated history, but essentially that sort of expensive materials, cheap labor dynamic switched, and technological advances have made extracting materials much cheaper. Globalization has made extracting materials much cheaper, and labor in the US has become more expensive. And that's for reasons that I hope we can all agree are positive, like safety regulations and minimum wage. So this meant that the cheapest option was to demolish a building as quickly as possible and landfill that waste. So the value wasn't in the material, it was in the timeline, providing the service as quickly as possible. And this shift in how we build and how we demolish has had serious implications for the environment, public health, and built heritage. The waste generated through construction activity is called construction and demolition waste. We usually call it C&D waste. The EPA tracks this waste and in 2009 estimated over 165 million tons. That number is a little hard to understand because it's nothing to compare it to, but it's expected to grow as construction activity increases. And only a quarter to a third is recycled or reused, and both demolitions and renovations are the main contributors. And there's a really inadequate understanding of the state of construction demolition waste broadly in the United States. And that is partly because municipalities have jurisdiction over waste. And there are several environmental consequences of landfilling C&D waste. One, the overburdening of landfills is definitely a concern, but maybe even more important than that is just deferred impacts. So the extraction of virgin material contributes to resource scarcity and habitat destruction and the release of toxic material and its further energy expenditures. And recycling of building material is increasing, but in many instances is also incredibly energy intensive and can also have detrimental health and environmental outcomes. And it doesn't necessarily disrupt the extraction of virgin material. So there's also a human impact. So mechanical demolition can produce dangerous levels of lead dust and particulate matter. Here in New York, where all my information comes from, over 2,000 children test positive for lead poisoning every year. And there's also evidence of public health effects for the communities that host C&D landfills. Since much of this waste stream is politically considered inert, states do not require these landfills to provide all the same environmental protections as those that municipal solid waste landfills are required to. And this is partly why C&D landfills generally have much lower tipping fees than MSW landfills. And these environmental hazards cannot be separated from systemic issues of race and class, as we know that demolition, landfills, and lead poisoning disproportionately affect poor communities and communities of color. And I have a degree in preservation, so I would be remiss if I didn't also mention heritage. Fast mechanical demolition of old buildings is really a story of tremendous loss. So the loss of traditional craftsmanship, of old growth wood, of beautiful architectural details sometimes, but also deep emotional loss within communities. Demolition can be very violent and traumatic, and this is especially true for neighborhoods that see high numbers of demolition. And so today's challenge is to move toward a more circular economy. And there's a real desire in environmental circles to make this linear life of building materials, extraction, construction, demolition, landfilling, more circular, with the waste from demolished buildings becoming the seed for new construction. In the built environment, this is accomplished through the careful dismantling of buildings to maximize reuse potential of its component parts. And as I mentioned earlier, this process is called deconstruction, where a building is taken apart, sort of in reverse of how it was constructed. Material reuse diverts construction waste destined for landfills. It reduces the extraction of natural resources and lowers greenhouse gas emissions created by the manufacture and transport of new materials. It also has the potential for other social benefits. It provides access to low cost or free building materials much of the time. And then because deconstruction is more labor intensive than demolition or mechanical demolition, that means it supports more jobs that are fairly accessible to people with a variety of skills and educational backgrounds. And the process of building deconstruction can also be helpful for communities dealing with the loss of that existing building, because there's more time to kind of process that change. And so because of these benefits, there's a lot of attention on deconstruction specifically and material reuse broadly at the municipal policy level. In 2016, this is probably the most famous policy around material reuse and deconstruction. Portland, Oregon passed the first deconstruction ordinance in the country, which requires that single family homes built before 1917 be deconstructed in order to get a demolition permit. And so this ordinance was actually expanded to all single family homes built before 1940. And this may not be a very surprising thing in a place like Portland that has a very civically active culture and an existing reuse industry. But there are a lot of cities that are looking to Portland as an inspiration and working on their own C&D regulations. In Pittsburgh, in April this year, Pittsburgh introduced its first citywide deconstruction policy. The mayor signed an executive order calling for the city to create a process for identifying deconstruction eligible structures among the 1,700 condemned buildings in Pittsburgh that the city is responsible for demolishing. And it will also create standards for recovery and recycling of materials for city-funded demolitions. And the new policy is really aiming to use deconstruction techniques to salvage materials from those demolitions and diverting the material to be used in other projects. I could spend a whole separate hour talking about different municipal level policies. I would love to. There's a lot of different types, and we often get questions about Portland's policy from folks wanting to sort of do the exact same thing in their city. And we remind them that the policy in Portland is very context specific, and really the most successful policies are always context specific, based on the capacity of the reuse industry in that particular city to absorb more material. There have been instances where that advice has not been followed, and it just was completely overwhelming. But there's a lot of change happening at the local level, and more change coming, I think. So there's changes on the horizon in Baltimore, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Ithaca, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, and those are just the people that we've been talking with. So this is really something that I think is going to become, we're going to have to pay attention to it because it's going to be a regulation. In the architecture profession, there's also obviously a growing interest in addressing waste as part of responsible sustainable design. So the Center for Architecture a few years ago released the Zero Waste Design Guidelines. There's obviously various sustainability credentialing programs that have credits or requirements for waste-related actions. I'm not super familiar with the intricacies of these credentialing systems, but I know, like in the Living Building Challenge, which has become sort of the pinnacle of green credentials, there's requirements around waste and reuse in the materials petal. There's also a sort of newer certification called True. I don't know if any of you use it or are familiar with it, but it's a specifically waste-specific credential. And so I think there's going to be more and more sort of pressure from the credentialing side as well. So given the importance of considering building material waste and reuse and the current policy and industry changes that are bringing reuse to the forefront, what is the role of architects? So I want to acknowledge that it's not an easy position to be in, that there's really the client demands, we ultimately work for clients, and we're not able to do everything we want to do on every project. There's often a lot of contractor reticence to doing something that they haven't done before. Code limitations to structural applications of reused materials, difficulty sourcing material if you need a lot of you know, doors for a big commercial project and you can't find them, that's a problem. Short timelines, and then of course, like a million priorities, and everything costs money, and everyone's always looking at architects to make it work. So I think that architects do have a lot of challenges in front of them, but also a lot of opportunities and a really big role to play in advocating for more reuse. So I think educating the client is probably the biggest opportunity. So architects really have the ear of the client a lot of the time, maybe to varying degrees, but there's definitely like direct communication and collaboration there. And there are incentives sometimes. So there's tax write-ups for donated material, you know, there's different ways of getting LEED points or living building points. And then there's also health concerns that we talked about earlier about mechanical demolition. And sort of regardless of what the client chooses to do or what the ultimate decision is, I think even just asking the question is important, and it's progress, because it's a conversation that typically isn't had at all. And so making them aware of something that they may not have considered might open up possibilities. So if your client is open to having the conversation, what does that look like? So to be successful, reuse needs to be considered as early as possible, before the design phase even, during program creation and site assessment. So during site assessment, a deconstruction or reuse assessment can be done. What is salvageable? What does the client want to keep? What can be reused on site? And what can be donated, resold, or recycled? And who needs to be contacted to make that happen? There's a few tools that exist to help sort of guide these questions. There's the EPA Deconstruction Rapid Assessment Tool, the Delta Institute Deconstruction and Reuse Go Guide. Seattle also has a salvage assessment form. And really it's important to do this early, partly because of the timeline question. And one of the things that sort of is the biggest challenges for people who do deconstruction or who accept reused materials is they'll get the phone call the day the building is coming down, and you know they can't accept it because they had no idea what was happening and their truck is somewhere else. And so it's really important that these sorts of things be decided and nailed down early. And then in guiding demolition, RFP and scope of work documents for contractors, it's important to have like criteria around salvage and deconstruction skills for contractors. That's something that can be written in. There's, in creating demolition documents, it becomes really imperative to sort of clearly delineate what is to be salvaged and how. And then I know this is something you all are really focused on, designing for reuse. And so incorporating reused materials into the design concept is super important. A lot of the policy pushes have been on the supply side in terms of like pushing for deconstruction of buildings so that there's this material that can be reused. But if the demand side isn't increased, then it doesn't really work, and there's nowhere for that material to go. So it's important to think about how we can design with reused materials. And so you can ask questions like, how will you incorporate what the client wanted to keep or what was salvaged from the existing building, if there was an existing building? What can be sourced from material reuse warehouses or known demolitions nearby? And you can spec for reused material, but not for specific companies or stores. I know this is something that you all are interested in, and I wish I knew more about it, but that's as deep as my knowledge goes. And then of course, designing for future disassembly. It can get very technical, but I think sort of there's some basic principles of like, don't use glue and use mechanical fasteners. And then beyond individual projects, I think architects have a really big role to play as advocates. Like this kind of work is happening in other fields that really need architects' perspectives and experiences. Build Reuse, for example, could really use that perspective. The Embodied Carbon Network, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is getting more involved in the US, but has been more focused on Europe. And then local waste management groups, local zero waste groups. all can benefit from your experiences. So I thought I'd end with some precedents to end on an inspirational little note. So the first group of projects I'd like to highlight are those that partnered with local nonprofit salvage warehouses. I'll begin with a Pennsylvania example. This was the host of the Decon and Reuse 2019 conference, the Phipps Center for Sustainable Landscapes in Pittsburgh. The center provides classroom and office space for the Phipps Conservancy and Botanical Gardens. And the project was targeting several sustainability credentials, including the Living Building Challenge. And because of this, reuse was incorporated very early on. The project team, before the site work began and throughout the construction process, the project team made a strong effort to salvage materials for use within construction of the new center. For materials that could not be repurposed on site, the project team partnered with Construction Junction in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh's first nonprofit building material reuse retailer, to take the salvage material. And in the end, salvage material comprised 10% of the building's materials. The siding was made from deconstructed barns in Western Pennsylvania and old Department of Public Works fuel tanks. And to meet well building requirements, the team needed formaldehyde-free wooden doors, and they were having a lot of trouble sourcing them. But eventually they were able to acquire some from a nearby office building that was undergoing a renovation. Here in New York, Etsy's headquarters, this was an interior office renovation in downtown Brooklyn in the old Jehovah's Witness Watchtower building. And early on, an inventory of the Etsy's old office, which was also in Brooklyn, and the new project site identified opportunities for extensive salvage and reuse, including over 750 furniture pieces and food service equipment. And Etsy partnered with Big Reuse, which is sort of like our version of Construction Junction, to send excess materials to nearby building projects. And scrap wood, because Etsy, went directly to their on-site wood shop, where it could be repurposed for projects around the office. And over 1,100 linear feet of reclaimed wood came from the water towers on site on the existing building, which was used to construct this entry stairway. And 800 linear feet of reclaimed wood from New York scaffolding is in the pantry areas and the cook closets. In Atlanta, so this is 1315 Peachtree Street, it's a rehab of a 1986 office building to be Perkins and Will's Atlanta headquarters. And they really wanted this building to be a model for sustainable renovation of an existing building. So it retained 91% of the original structure, and the team set a target that 75% of waste generated would be reused, repurposed, recycled, or otherwise diverted. And they also designed for future disassembly. More than 60% of this structure is entirely demountable and designed to be deconstructed and repurposed. And the team reached out to several local nonprofits to donate furniture and materials from the existing building. Ultimately, 80% of demolition and construction waste was diverted from landfills to more than 20 local nonprofit organizations, but it was very ad hoc. It was kind of a stop and go process because at the time there was no local nonprofit salvage organization in Atlanta that would take this material. And they were able to do this because this was going to be their office. So there was a little more flexibility to hold on to material for a while. So one of the architects who worked on this project was Shannon Goodman, and she was just totally taken with reuse and ended up leaving Perkins & Will to start Atlanta's first nonprofit salvage operation, the Life Cycle Building Center. And Shannon is one of my fellow board members for Build Reuse, and she's also presenting at the conference. And the C.K. Coie building at the University of British Columbia is one of my favorite examples, and you can find a book on it, like a very rare book on eBay that I recommend purchasing because it's pretty in-depth. This was built in 1996 to house the Institute of Asian Research. It's an example of a project that made use of a nearby demolition within the same institution to source the material. So the design was created knowing that the university planned to demolish this old 1940s armory building adjacent to the new site. And I see a lot of opportunity there. The firms that I have worked with have also done a lot of institutional work, a lot of institutional projects, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to see, you know, what else is planned on campus to make use of that. Ultimately, 60% of timber came from the Armory building, and 100% of the exterior brick cladding came from these paver bricks from around Vancouver, these like early 20th century streets. And paver bricks are denser than typical facade bricks, and so there's no interior core. So they're actually very good for a reuse application. In wood doors and frames were reused from a downtown building that was undergoing renovation from office to residential use. And then interior handrails, all reused from a demoed golf course. And I wanted to end with a couple of projects that are designing for future disassembly. The Longfu Life Experience Center is a pretty cool example. I see the most design for disassembly happening in temporary structures, like for festivals and performances. So in this example, this is a real estate sales center. So it's inherently temporary. And the brief required rapid assembly and disassembly and the reusability of materials. And all components can be completely dismantled and reused for other constructions. But this is virgin wood. It's not reused, but it will be reused in the future. And Luo's studio also used the same technique with reclaimed lumber in a small village in Northeast China. And so in this case, the timbers in the pergola came from a government-sponsored initiative to remodel existing homes in town. And in the town, they built this pergola. So thank you again for inviting me to speak with you today. I'd like to kind of turn it over to you all for questions and ideas, and I'm really excited to learn what you've been working on. So thank you again.
Allison, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. I guess we'd like to turn it over to the group and see if they'd like to, you know, ask you a few questions before we use up all of your time.
I had a, oh, wait, Marianne, do you want to go?
No, you go first.
Well, I just had a question because you said that you had mentioned that the materials are low cost and even potentially free. And I was wondering if you could expand on that point, because I felt like that conflicted with what Fern Guggen had talked to us about last week, that it can be very expensive.
Yes, so there's a wide variety. So it can be very expensive. It can be a very expensive market for architecturally, I guess the word would be like significant features that are highly desirable. Those can be incredibly expensive. But there's a lot more like sort of prosaic material that ends up at reuse stores like bathroom cabinets and, you know, like fixtures that are not going to be demanding high prices, but can be used. And I say low cost to free because it also depends sort of on the mission of the organization. So in some cases, a lot of cases, these reuse stores might have sort of like two buckets of stock sort of. So like their regular stock, and then they might have these partnerships with local schools or nonprofits where they just do a direct donation of material.
Gotcha.
Allison, thank you. That was really inspiring talk. I wanted to ask you about the Perkins and Will, you know, home office project, or not home office, but, you know, the office in Atlanta. And if you know anything about how they did their, you know, construction documents, and what does it add to the project? And if they do they do talks, or do they share this sort of model of their work with others? Yeah.
Sure. So I don't know much about the construction documents. I know that it did extend their timeline, and it was really only because they were their own client that they could kind of make that work. I don't know about current Perkins and Will presentations, but Shannon will give a presentation on this anytime, I'm sure.
Great.
Yeah, I think she'd be happy to talk about it. She has a very unique perspective now that she's on the other side.
Right.
I wanted to ask you a question, Allison. I guess it has to do with ordinances for deconstruction. You said at the beginning of your presentation that the most successful solutions are very context-based. And you gave the example that people have tried to sort of borrow like the Portland model, and it may or may not translate to other areas. And you're not the, I mean, other people have said the same thing. You know, I've heard them say the same thing. So where's the starting point? Like, how do you begin to understand your own context?
Yeah. So I think what was really successful about Portland is that they didn't, first of all, it came from community pressure. So there was neighborhood groups who for different reasons, some motivated by zero waste ideas and some motivated by Portland has a very intense real estate market where the land is more valuable than the houses on the land. And so people are buying properties and demolishing houses and building these like McMansions. And so there's a lot of pushback from that, from the neighborhood. And so that's one of the reasons was they're like, let's try to make it harder for people to demolish. There are a lot of different motivations. But what they did was they created a deconstruction advisory group, which didn't have the purpose of creating an ordinance, but was to determine what policy should there be. Just a, you know, sort of a blanket brief of like what policy should there be around deconstruction. And it included preservationists, it included people from these neighborhood groups. It also included contractors and demolition contractors. And so it tried to bring all voices into this group to create something that people could really get behind and that wouldn't sort of be this shock once it was passed. So this took a couple of years, and they also paired it with training in deconstruction, a lot of training. Portland already had a couple of deconstruction firms in the city and several reuse retail outlets, but they knew that they needed to do more training to create more, you know, like competent firms to handle this increase in business that would come from this ordinance. And then the other thing they did, which I think was really important, is that they partnered with a local university. I'm forgetting which one now, but they've done a couple of reports with this university. So before the ordinance was passed, they estimated sort of how many buildings this would affect, how much material would come from that. I think they even estimated, you know, how many jobs would be created. And then after, so the first phase was buildings built before 1917. And this is, sorry, I shouldn't say buildings, residential homes built before 1917. And because they were being very cautious about the amount of material, so they were determining this was like a sizable number of the buildings that are demolished every year. And then after a couple of years, they partnered again with the same university to sort of determine what the effect of the policy had been, and they determined that the market could really handle more, and they pushed the year up to 1940. And it's been very successful, and really there hasn't been any pushback. If anything, the only pushback is like it should be more buildings. It should like not just be residential, it should be commercial, which is something that I'm sure Yarden will speak with you about, because that's something she's very passionate about, is commercial reuse.
Thank you for that. That is very helpful to us, because we're sort of in the early stages of this, and we don't want to spin our wheels. We don't want to repeat previous mistakes. I know that I've had a few conversations with some of the people in Pittsburgh, and they've said some of the things that you're saying, like don't make the mistake of borrowing something and thinking it translates. So we appreciate some of the things that, you know, may get us on the right foot. Maybe we can partner with the university, maybe, you know, all these things.
Yeah, and I think there's so many other smaller bite-sized things you can do before an ordinance, which in a way is what Pittsburgh is doing, is they're like, let's apply this just to city-owned or city responsible demolitions, as like, it's kind of like a pilot, really. Like, how would this work as a regulation? And they can work out the kinks and see how see how things are going before they try to institute something for the whole city.
Wonderful. Does anybody, can I sneak in one more question? I don't know if other people want to jump ahead of me. The one thing I was wondering was, obviously we're all doing this for many reasons, you know, salvaging materials, circularity, promoting this, changing sort of the linear path that we have been on historically to make it a circular path in terms of consumption. Are there specific examples where, as part of this effort, people are able to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions that are being reduced? This is something that, you know, we talk about so we can have tangible proof for those who need it, right? Like, we believe in this, but to really say, look, you know, we diverted it from the landfill. Look how much we are keeping from going into the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question. I know that people are doing that sort of assessment. I don't know how established it is. So we, this past year for Build Reuse, have started to form a data and policy work group, because there's been a lot of interest around data and policy, and they kind of go hand in hand sometimes. And that's sort of like the #1 question that everyone had about data was like, how can we quantify this in terms of carbon? So it may be putting it too strongly to say we're working on it, but we're trying to work on it. We're thinking about working on it. And hopefully as that group kind of forms together more, we can get some like specific research priorities.
Well, this is, I appreciate what you're saying. Meaningful change takes time, right? So if it were easy, you know, it would have been done by now.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious what you all have been working on in the Zero Waste group.
Who wants to speak, guys? Go for it. Is Lauren on the call? Does she want to talk about the competition? Maybe she's tied up.
Hi, I'm here. We had thoughts about setting up a competition or a kind of thought gathering outreach to have people share ideas about a deconstruction detail. So bringing something to us where, I don't know, selecting a material, maybe it's drywall, and trying to come up with a way that you could install that for deconstruction. And then using that as a way of kind of getting some ideas and generating a dialogue with a larger group outside of our group.
Great idea.
And we've also been talking about materials, like, or trying to generate a conversation about local materials. Again, trying to be specific to the area that we are in, which is Philly and Greater Philadelphia. So it's a work in progress. Certainly learning from other groups as to what we should pick, how would we quantify it, so on and so forth.
It was really exciting to see your details, Allison. I took a little screenshot of the steel and wood, I think it was, because that's sort of along the lines of Lauren's idea of actually taking, or actually I think it was Jonathan's idea on top of Lauren's idea. I think at the last meeting, Jonathan said maybe we should, you know, create a detail from deconstructed materials rather than, you know, and everybody, so Lauren came up with the original idea and then Jonathan sort of added to that. And maybe you could, you know, give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I can definitely share the presentation with you too, so you can have all those sources.
Thank you.
So, you know, this is where my not being an architect limits me a little bit. But I know that there is a group there was like this hackathon a couple months ago. Yeah, I think I sent the mural boards to Daphne.
I tried to spread it around, so
Yeah.
that's sort of a partial inspiration for what we're trying to get at. So we did look at some of that.
Cool. Yeah, I think a lot of us non-architects showed up at that hackathon. We're like, just ready to talk. So I don't know if they got as many details as they wanted. But I think they want it to kind of continue and grow, and people add to it.
I think one of the
Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, one of the questions that we've been throwing around is what kinds of materials should we be focusing on? If we do try to do this competition idea, should we be identifying a few materials that are out there that we're struggling to reuse? That would be, we have a lot of it and we need to figure out a way to reuse it. Is there anything that you're seeing a lot of?
Yeah, so a couple ideas on that front. So a big project at Construction Junction in Pittsburgh was this Project where they kind of tackled the question of hollow core doors, which are not super desirable in a reuse application. And so that's a pretty cool project if you ever want to take a road trip up to Pittsburgh and check it out. The other thing that comes to mind, which again, I think Yarden will be kind of the expert on this, is commercial buildings and commercial materials, because it's so different. Like the residential market, I don't want to say it's like set and it's like fine and good to go, but there's been so much focus on the residential market of like materials for your home and deconstructing residential buildings, that the commercial market is like this huge opportunity and huge amount of waste. And Yarden has done a lot of work on like luxury retail fit outs and how much waste is involved in that and these sort of specific problems there. So I think that commercial reuse, I don't know about specific materials, but definitely that sector I think could use the most help.
One of the things that Fern mentioned that is in abundance in our area, and I'm curious what you think about this, is rigid isolation, insulation and foam insulation. Do you see any movement with this? We were kind of stumped by that because, what do you do with it?
I have no idea. I wish I had a good answer for you. I have no idea. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, again, it's inspired by Jonathan's thought. Well, what do we do with these wasted materials? Okay, yeah. So we can detail. And then, Fern says that. And we're like, oh God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you can, a lot of times I've seen like built up concrete kind of like we've been doing a lot of plinths lately, like concrete plinths at the bottom of stairs. And a lot of times they'll put in insulation as just a filler, but they're probably buying brand new boards of insulation to then cover up and never see again. So it's just as like form work for concrete to minimize the amount of volume of concrete that you're pouring to save money. It could be interesting to put anything in there that can kind of take a shape. Just a thought.
So it would be really interesting to see that, Lauren. It's hard to visualize. Maybe you
can send you the sections.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Do you have any pearls of wisdom generally that we can incorporate as we move forward with this? Like something that you think we should look at first before we delve into this idea of the detail, or what are your thoughts?
You guys are doing everything right. As far as I can tell, I think you really are, you're on the right track. I know you've been connected with Greg Trainer. And so that would kind of be my suggestion, is to connect with like the local deconstruction and reuse retail people in Philadelphia, since they're working with this material the most. But I think you're already doing that. So I think you're in a good spot.
That's very kind. One of the things that I think that we would like to do, but I certainly haven't found it, is to have contractors join the conversation too, to
Yeah.
see how, if they're on board and if they could be a part of this. And I'm stumped, you know, I don't know
Yeah.
where to go with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal all of Yarden's ideas, so I apologize. But one of the things that she did at her firm, Allison RTKL, was they got together sort of like repeat clients and repeat contractors and design staff with some facilitators, because they were finding that a lot of times people were like pointing to the other person, like, oh, well, they don't want to do it. But if they're all in the room, then they can't do that. So they kind of like split into groups, and it was, you know, it's like an easy crowd of people that they work with a lot, to point out the biggest challenges and the ways to sort of meet those challenges. There is a report about that, which I can send to you. But I think that's sort of like, she wants to do more of that. And I think that's the sort of thing that is, it's sort of like a mini deconstruction advisory group exercise. And I think that's a great idea.
Were the contractors asked? I mean, what did they ask the contractors? What were the actual questions? Do you know?
Oh, gosh, I don't remember. But I think they were asked sort of like, how would you approach a certain situation? And, you know, what would prevent you from like doing a salvage effort, or what would prevent you from reusing that material? And there's some really interesting, just like super interesting things that I had never heard of, like proprietary marble. That was news to me, that some luxury brands have their own marble that they won't let anyone else use. So just, there's a lot of interesting things sort of came out of that. But I think the most important thing was the sense that it was like something that could be solved. Like if everyone was talking together and working on it, like, okay, we can actually make improvements on this rather than sort of being stopped by the challenge.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's a good starting point. I mean, we haven't to clients. I mean, we're all doing different things as practitioners, but
Yeah.
maybe it would make it less intimidating if everybody asked one of their collaborators to join the circle, so to speak, and share
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah, and I can connect you with a really cool contractor in the Bay Area who has been doing their own sort of deconstruction efforts. Alejandra Arce Gomez.
Oh, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, she's really awesome. Obviously, Bay Area is a different context, but they have been really like pushing the limits of, I guess, of what is typical for big contractors. So it's cool.
Well, I would be interested because my firm is in San Francisco.
Oh, well, there
Yeah.
you go. Yeah, no, I'll send you her information.
Thank you so much. We're coming up on the hour, and so wanted to give people another chance to ask any questions before we have to say goodbye. Any last little pieces? As soon as we say goodbye, we're going to think of things, Allison, I promise you.
You can email me. Well, I hope you'll all consider coming to the conference. It's virtual. It's easy to kind of have on in the background as you work from home. But on the third day, we're doing these solution sessions, which is something we started in 2019, where it's less of a presentation and it's more like one topic and everyone comes together to talk and solve, come up with solutions for that one topic. So it's sort of like what we were talking about. So I recommend it.
Thank you for that. The lineup looks fantastic.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good one.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.